My name is Bill Moore. I'm a solutions architect for my own company called Atmosoft, and we do a lot of work with legacy systems, upgrading them, moving them into the cloud. More from the development side, but we do a lot of DevOps work.
When we say legacy for the panel, what do you think of? What are you working on currently that's legacy?
So I'm working on a legacy system right now. The company that we're doing work for is trying to migrate to another platform. So we're currently maintaining an ASP.NET web format that was written. I mean, web forms has been around since '99. I was doing it back then, and so yeah. So and it's one of those situations where every time you touch something somewhere else breaks, and so we spend a lot of time just breaking it out and then getting the components so that the website doesn't go down all the time, and then obviously they don't want to put a lot of money into it because they're trying to migrate somewhere else. So it's not like you don't get a lot of time to fix it. It's basically like just keep the wheels on the car and until we're ready to retire the vehicle.
Yeah. And that's scary, right? Because we're not trying to modernize it. We're trying to leave it alone, leave it in the background, let it run. Don't touch it.
Yeah, there's certain areas where in the code where you're like,
I've seen that with lots of customers. All right. So how do you deal with the underlying data stores there? Because that always is a question for me, right? Like, feature flags are great, but we've made all these changes and we probably made changes to our underlying data. That's a long period for data divergence. How do you deal with that?
I like to basically do a level of abstraction. So first thing I want to do is I isolate the model. So I'll convert the existing table into or data elements into a view, and then I'll point the code to the view. Then I'll adjust the model, and then I'll update the code.
Let's talk about containerization in legacy systems. Who's seen it done really well? Who's seen it done poorly? I've seen both. I've seen containers that shouldn't have been containers. But I've also seen them do some things that I'm like, at first glance, that should never be a container. But then I look at it and I'm like, but that was brilliant because it got you out of a bind. You're running shared isolated systems that now, like, it's a legacy system. You've run a legacy system in a container. Is there oxymoron there? How have other people dealt with containers?
On the legacy system, that's the whole breaking the monolith pattern, right? So I've done that too. So the system was huge, it's a legacy system, and then I isolated the pieces and then put them in containers and then hosted them and then stuck an API in front of them, and then just get everything communicating and talking together, and then you still kind of have the monolith pattern, but you're also working on a pattern it's a little more sustainable, and
sure, slowly pruning the tree off, making it a little shorter. Yeah. How do people best deal with networking? Who's had good experiences and bad experiences with networking? And as you pull these pieces apart, because they used to communicate on localhost over a socket, or else directly, right? Oftentimes code paths, we didn't even deal with the socket, right? We just called it was all part of this monolith, so we just called into the code. How do you guys deal with networks?
I like an orchestration layer, especially if you don't want to modify the underlying code a lot, and you just kind of want to pull it out and get it hosted, and then you can add the intelligence on the orchestration layer to do that.
Are we talking like an Istio, or are we talking like, what are we talking about orchestration layer here?
So usually I just done custom ones, not like, because so we're working on a microservice to pull apart an application, and so it's just a small custom orchestration engine that kind of gives that code by default didn't have the network latency or retry or circuit breaker patterns or anything like that. So you just kind of put some of that infrastructure on top, and then you route it to the orchestrator, and then it's kind of handling the code underneath and the calls and the APIs. And it handles the network.
So you're abstracting the network away. Okay.
And you can do.
Totally agree. One of the best things I saw when I worked at AWS is the way that they treated failure. And they're like, we have to review this. And at first I thought it was like, well, we have to review this. It's, yell at somebody. I was like, no, we have to review this because we can learn things. And if we don't review this, we're leaving things on the table that we could have learned that will bite us later. And that was an amazing insight into why they're successful.
I think an important consideration too, especially in the legacy system I'm maintaining right now, is a strong consideration around cost. Right, because I'm maintaining this legacy system. We know it's going to be sunlit. We don't know the exact time, probably the next 6 months or something like that. And so every time I look at a code, or I look at a code fix, or I look at a deployment, I have to think like, is it worth the company paying the money for me to spend time on this, because this is going away. So there's basically a money bucket that, you know, there's not going to be an ROI. It's not going to be around for the next 10 years.
So again, going back to Gus. Bowen, we have time for one last question. Right in the back with a hand up. One last question or comment, and we are going to close this panel out.
What would the panel suggest the best course of action for dealing with an engineer or developer who unintentionally, but good intentioned, creates technical debt because of the repeated technology or tools that they continue to use? For example, if you have a Java developer, everything looks like a tool or a problem that they can solve with Java, which doesn't necessarily make sense from a DevOps or CI/CD perspective. How do you rein that person in without stomping on them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, at least for me, I'll take a stab at it. That's really a communication problem, right? Like, as we started out with, there are no really hard technology problems. There are really hard organizational problems. And I think it involves having a relationship with that person, right? To be somebody that you trust or they trust, and be like, hey, we're going to work through this, you know, and it's hard because egos come into play, but I think it really becomes more of a mentoring and a working with problem than a, hey, you can try to solve it technologically, but if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And this person has the Java hammer or the Go hammer or whatever hammer they happen to have in their hand at the time. And I think it's really just mentoring and working and dealing with it on an organizational level rather than trying to solve the problem technologically, because it won't happen. Any other comments? Am I way off base?
Nope, 100%. They may only have one tool, and so they solve it.
Teaching new tools. I liked your mentoring comment. That's extremely important, because in my organization, I've dealt with similar issues. I have people who are database experts, and they just do database things, and everything gets solved with a query, and everything gets, you know, views and stored procedures, and sometimes you gotta pull them back a little bit and say, hey, this is faster if I do this over here.